White woman calls cops on black schoolboy, then freezes. When his mother, an FBI agent, arrives, it was a regular day at school when a white woman, irritated by a black schoolboy's presence in the park, decided to call the cops. She claimed the boy was causing trouble, despite him doing nothing more than sitting on the steps and minding his own business. As the situation escalated, the boy's fear grew. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong, but the woman's assumption weighed heavily on him. Just as the officers arrived, expecting trouble, the boy's mother appeared. The woman's expression changed instantly when she realized who the boy's mother was, an FBI agent. The shift in the atmosphere was immediate. The officer's demeanor shifted from suspicious to respectful, and the woman, now realizing her mistake, stood frozen in silence. The power of this moment wasn't just in the woman's realization, but in the undeniable truth that this mother, a high-ranking federal agent, would not let anyone disrespect her son. What started as an unfair accusation ended up with a reminder of the importance of standing up for what's right and never assuming someone's worth based on race. If you enjoyed this powerful story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more incredible content like this. Share this video with your friends and family to spread the message of justice, equality, and standing up for what's right. Elijah's mind raced as he stood there, stunned by the woman's words. He had never experienced anything like this before. He had lived in this town all his life, where people knew each other, or at least that's what he had thought. The woman's accusation felt like a sharp blow to the chest. He hadn't even had the chance to explain himself before she had jumped to conclusions. As she continued to speak to the dispatcher on the phone, her words ringing in his ears, Elijah felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness. How could she see him as a threat when all he was doing was buying a snack? He felt the weight of her judgment, the way she viewed him simply because of the color of his skin. He had always believed that people were supposed to be treated equally, regardless of where they came from. But this situation made him realize how much work still needed to be done to change the world around him. He felt a pit in his stomach as he watched the woman's expression harden, her eyes glaring at him, still clutching her phone. He could hear her every word on the call as she described him, nothing more than a suspicious black boy. It was then that the realization hit him. She wasn't scared of him. She was scared of the color of his skin, and that was the real problem. A few moments later, the sound of sirens in the distance made his heart race. Elijah stood frozen, wondering if the police would show up and what would happen next. He had heard stories of police overreacting, of young black boys being treated unfairly, and the fear began to creep in. He hadn't done anything wrong, yet here he was, the subject of someone else's fear. It felt surreal. The woman stood there, a smug look on her face, as if she had already won. Elijah turned to leave, but the door opened, and a familiar voice called out his name. His heart skipped a beat as he saw his mother, FBI agent Rachel Johnson, walk into the store. Rachel had just finished a long shift, and she was surprised to see her son standing in the middle of this tense moment. She immediately recognized the situation and stepped into action. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice calm but filled with authority. The woman turned to face her, startled by her sudden appearance. "This boy was acting suspicious, and I felt uncomfortable," she said, her voice faltering under Rachel's gaze. Rachel's eyes narrowed as she took in the scene. She looked at Elijah, who was still standing there, trying to make sense of everything. Without a second thought, Rachel turned back to the woman, her stance commanding. "Ma'am, I suggest you step aside and let me handle this." She quickly flashed her badge, making the woman's face drain of color. Rachel was no stranger to dealing with tense situations, but this one hit differently. She looked at Elijah, her son, standing strong. Despite the humiliation he was facing, she could see the pain in his eyes, the confusion, and the helplessness. In that moment, she knew that this wasn't just about a misunderstanding. It was about something much bigger. It was about the systemic issues that still plagued their community, the unfair treatment that people of color continued to face. As the woman stammered, trying to explain herself, Rachel calmly but firmly asked her to leave the store. "You've made your point, and now you need to understand that your actions have consequences," Rachel said. The woman, clearly rattled, turned and walked out, leaving the store in a hurry. Rachel immediately knelt beside Elijah, pulling him into a comforting embrace. "I'm so proud of you for staying calm, baby, but this is something we're going to have to keep fighting against, okay?" Elijah nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for all the others who had been unfairly judged. His mother's presence had been the turning point, and as they walked out of the store together, he realized that sometimes standing up against injustice meant having the right people by your side. It meant confronting those who thought they could get away with discrimination and showing them that their actions would not go unnoticed. Rachel and Elijah left the store with a newfound sense of purpose. This incident, as painful as it had been, had ignited something in both of them. They knew they couldn't change the world overnight, but they could make a difference, one person at a time. And together, they would continue to fight for a world where people of all backgrounds were treated with the respect and dignity they deserved. As they walked away, Elijah felt a sense of pride in his heart. He had stood up for himself, with the strength of his mother and the support of the people around him. He knew that this was just one battle in a long fight, but it was a fight he was ready to face head-on. The tension in the air was suffocating. Elijah could feel his heart pounding in his chest as the officers exchanged cold looks. The one who had spoken to him before stepped forward, his hand hovering near his belt where the handcuffs were. Elijah's mind raced as he tried to process everything that was happening. He was just a 14-year-old kid, standing in the middle of a store, having done nothing wrong, yet here he was, facing the possibility of being arrested. He couldn't help but feel helpless, a wave of anxiety washing over him. His stomach churned as he thought about how this could go horribly wrong, how this could turn into something bigger than he ever imagined. He hadn't done anything suspicious, but somehow it didn't seem to matter. The woman had already labeled him as a threat simply because of his race, and now the officers were backing her up, their actions telling him everything he needed to know about how they saw him. In that moment, Elijah's world seemed to slow down. His thoughts blurred, and for a second, it felt as though the room was closing in on him. He had seen too many stories of young black boys being wrongfully treated by the police. Stories of misunderstandings that escalated far too quickly. Stories of lives changed forever in an instant. This felt like one of those stories. Elijah felt the weight of history on his shoulders as the officers moved closer, their eyes never leaving him. He felt as if he was invisible, as if the only thing they saw was his skin. This wasn't just a random encounter. It was a reflection of the systemic biases that people like him faced every day. It didn't matter that he was just a kid with no ill intentions. What mattered was that he was black, and that alone seemed to be enough to make him a target. But just as Elijah began to feel completely overwhelmed, he heard a voice behind him, a calm, commanding voice that instantly made his heart skip a beat. "Is there a problem here?" The voice was steady, strong, and unmistakable. Elijah turned around to see his mother, Rachel Johnson, walking toward him. Rachel was an FBI agent, known for her calm demeanor and unshakable confidence, and in that moment, Elijah felt a surge of relief wash over him. His mother had always been his protector, someone who taught him to stand up for himself and never back down in the face of injustice. Rachel walked up to the officers with an air of authority, her eyes scanning the situation in an instant. "I'm Agent Rachel Johnson," she said, her badge visible to the officers. "I'm Elijah's mother, and I'd like to know why you're questioning him." The officers paused for a moment, clearly taken aback by her presence. They weren't used to being confronted like this, especially by someone of Rachel's standing. The woman, who had started this whole ordeal, stood silent, her face red with embarrassment. She hadn't expected anyone to show up who could challenge her claims, let alone someone with the authority and experience Rachel had. The officers looked at each other, uncertain, but after a brief moment, they stepped back, no longer feeling as confident as they had when they first approached Elijah. One of them cleared his throat. "There was a misunderstanding," he said, his voice now hesitant. "We were called because the woman here felt uncomfortable with the boy's presence." Rachel didn't waste any time. "And what exactly was the reason for your approach? Was there any indication that Elijah was doing anything wrong?" Her voice was calm but firm, each word measured and purposeful. The officers fumbled with their words, and Rachel turned to the woman who had caused the whole scene. "Ma'am," Rachel said coldly, "I suggest you reconsider your actions before I file a formal complaint against you." The woman, visibly shrinking under Rachel's gaze, stammered and started to apologize, but Rachel wasn't finished. "I'll be speaking with your supervisor," Rachel added, her voice cutting through the tension. "This behavior cannot be tolerated. Elijah has done nothing wrong, and you have no right to treat him this way." The officers, now visibly uncomfortable, nodded and began to back off. Rachel turned to Elijah, her gaze softening. "Are you okay, baby?" she asked gently, wrapping him in her arms. Elijah, still shaken but now feeling safe, nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't do anything, Mom," he said, his eyes filled with confusion. "Why would she call the police on me?" Rachel squeezed him tighter. "Because some people are afraid of what they don't understand. But you're not alone in this, Elijah." The officers, now realizing they had no grounds to continue, apologized and left the store quickly. As the situation finally de-escalated, Rachel spoke quietly to Elijah. "You did everything right, son. You stayed calm, and you were brave." Elijah looked up at his mother, a sense of pride filling him. "I was scared," he admitted. Rachel smiled, brushing a hand through his hair. "I know. But sometimes, even when you're scared, you have to stand tall and speak up. And you did just that." They left the store together, the weight of the incident still lingering, but also with a sense of justice and pride. Elijah knew he was far from done facing challenges, but with his mother by his side, he felt ready to face whatever came next. This was just one chapter of a bigger story, and it was a reminder that when people stand together against injustice, change is possible. The woman who had entered the store was none other than Elijah's mother, Rachel Johnson, an experienced FBI agent known for her sharp mind and unwavering composure in high-pressure situations. Her gaze was steady, her posture commanding as she surveyed the scene with practiced eyes. The air in the room seemed to shift, the tension dissipating as her presence alone made the officers hesitate. Rachel's reputation preceded her, and she knew how to handle herself in these situations, especially when it came to protecting her son. Elijah, still shaken but now feeling a sense of relief, could hardly believe what was happening. His mother was here, and with her came a sense of safety, a reassurance that everything would be okay. The officers, momentarily thrown off by her sudden appearance, stepped back as Rachel approached with authority. "Is there a problem here?" she repeated, her voice calm yet firm. The woman who had called the police, now visibly uncomfortable, stammered, trying to explain her actions. But Rachel wasn't having any of it. She had seen this before. The unjust treatment, the racial profiling, and the biases that often went unnoticed by those in power. She wasn't going to let this slip by. Rachel turned her attention to the officers, her gaze sharp and uncompromising. "You've been called to a situation involving a young black boy who has done nothing wrong, yet you're standing here ready to make an arrest. Tell me, officers, what exactly is the reason for your involvement?" The officers exchanged uneasy glances, realizing they had no justification for their actions. They had been called on the basis of an unfounded accusation, with no evidence or valid reason to question Elijah. The silence in the room was palpable as the weight of the situation settled in. Rachel's presence had exposed the truth. Elijah had been judged not by his actions, but by the color of his skin. She turned back to the woman who had made the call, her voice cool and authoritative. "Ma'am, I suggest you think very carefully about your actions. You've just called the police on an innocent child, and that will have consequences." The woman, now visibly embarrassed, opened her mouth to respond but couldn't find the words. She could only stare at Rachel, realizing the gravity of what she had done. Rachel's eyes softened slightly as she turned to Elijah, her voice now gentle and comforting. "Are you okay, baby?" she asked, her hand resting on his shoulder. Elijah nodded, feeling a weight lift off his chest as his mother's protective presence enveloped him. He was no longer just a scared kid caught in an unjust situation. He was now standing beside his mother, who had the power to put things right. Rachel gave the officers one last look, making it clear that their involvement was no longer necessary. "This is a misunderstanding, and it's over," she said firmly. "You're free to go." With that, the officers, sensing the shift in power, made their way toward the exit, their heads lowered in embarrassment. The woman, still speechless, watched them go, realizing the damage her actions had caused. Rachel turned to Elijah with a reassuring smile. "Let's get out of here," she said, her voice warm and filled with relief. As they left the store together, Elijah felt a newfound sense of pride. His mother had stood up for him in the face of injustice, and her actions had not only protected him, but also taught him an important lesson in standing up for what's right. Elijah's experience that day was a reminder that, despite the challenges they faced, there were people who would always fight for him, and that standing up against unfair treatment could make a difference. As they walked out of the store, Elijah knew that no matter what the world might throw at him, he had his mother by his side, and that in itself was the greatest source of strength. Simone Johnson had always been a pillar of strength, both in her career and in her personal life. A dedicated FBI agent with years of service, she had spent her life fighting for justice, for equality, and for the truth. Elijah, her son, had grown up watching her take on the toughest cases with dignity and integrity. He admired her not just for her work, but for the love and guidance she had shown him, teaching him the value of standing up for what's right no matter the cost. That afternoon, when she walked into the convenience store, she immediately sensed the tension in the air. As she approached the scene, her eyes scanned the situation. Her son, who had done nothing wrong, was being falsely accused of something he hadn't done. Her maternal instincts kicked in instantly, and her calm but authoritative presence sent ripples through the room. The officers, who had previously been unbothered by the situation, now straightened their posture at the sight of her. They knew who she was, and they knew her reputation well. Detective Simone Johnson wasn't someone to be taken lightly. The moment she addressed them, the officer's demeanor shifted. One of them, the younger one, began to apologize, but Simone didn't let him finish. "Just what?" she interrupted, her voice firm and unyielding. The authority she exuded was undeniable. The woman who had called the police, now standing frozen in place, realized her mistake too late. The color drained from her face as she realized who Simone was. The woman standing in front of her wasn't just a concerned bystander, she was an FBI agent, someone who had the power to expose her actions. The woman stammered, struggling to find words. I didn't know. I just thought he... I'm so sorry, I didn't mean... Her apology was weak, her voice shaking. But Simone wasn't here for apologies. She was here to protect her son, and nothing would get in the way of that. Simone's gaze was unwavering as she turned to face the woman directly. "Ma'am," she said, her voice cold and controlled, I think you owe my son an apology." The woman didn't speak, and Simone knew. The apology wouldn't be genuine, but it was clear that her power in that moment had left the woman speechless. Turning back to Elijah, Simone's demeanor softened. She walked over to him, put her arm around his shoulders, and led him away from the scene. "Let's go home," she said quietly, her voice full of reassurance and comfort. As they left the store, Elijah's heart was filled with gratitude. His mother had shown him what true strength and justice looked like, and he felt a deep sense of pride. The entire experience had been a wake-up call for Elijah, a reminder of how important it was to stand up for what's right, even when it wasn't easy. Simone had not only protected him, but had also taught him the power of speaking out against unfairness and prejudice. It wasn't just about getting an apology. It was about the principle of standing firm in the face of injustice and making sure that people were held accountable for their actions. That day, Elijah had seen firsthand what it meant to fight for the truth and to never back down. And for Simone, it wasn't just about being an FBI agent, it was about being a mother who would always stand up for her child. As they walked out of the store, Simone's actions had not only given Elijah a lesson in justice, but had also left an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed the confrontation. As Elijah walked out of the store with his mother, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The mix of relief and pride was overwhelming. His mother, Detective Simone Johnson, had come to his aid in the most powerful way possible, but it wasn't just about her rescuing him from an unfair situation. It was about the lesson he had learned. He realized that sometimes it wasn't enough to remain quiet or passive in the face of injustice. Sometimes you had to stand up for yourself, even when it seemed like no one else would. And sometimes the right person would stand up for you when you needed it most. The world could be unfair, but that didn't mean he had to accept it. He could speak up. He could fight for what was right. And most importantly, he had a powerful role model in his mother, someone who had shown him that strength came not just from authority, but from love, care, and the courage to do what was right. Elijah had always admired his mother, but that day his admiration grew exponentially. He saw in her not just a law enforcer, but a woman who was unflinchingly dedicated to protecting what mattered most: her family, her community, and the truth. Her work wasn't just about fighting crime, it was about fighting for justice in every corner of her life, even when it was as personal as defending her own child. As they drove home, Elijah reflected on how he had witnessed his mother in action, not just as an FBI agent, but as a mother who would never let her son be wronged, who would make sure he stood up for himself, and who would always be there to protect him. The pride he felt wasn't just for her bravery, it was for the lessons she had taught him without even trying. The importance of standing your ground, knowing your worth, and having the courage to challenge the unjust systems that try to silence you. The incident became a defining moment for Elijah, a moment that helped shape his perspective on the world. He no longer saw himself as just another kid trying to get by in a world full of unfairness. He saw himself as someone who had a right to speak out, to demand respect, and to stand up against prejudice and injustice. The story of what had happened at the convenience store quickly spread throughout the community. The people who had witnessed the situation began to talk, sharing their own experiences of racial prejudice and what it meant to fight against it. The community, both white and black, came together in a new understanding of how important it was to stand up for what was right. The incident didn't just affect Elijah, it affected everyone who had been paying attention. It sparked conversations about how racial prejudice still existed in everyday life, even in small-town communities, and how it was important to call it out and challenge it. But for Elijah, it wasn't just about the discussion that followed, it was about the deep realization that his mother's work wasn't confined to her job in the FBI. It was a reflection of who she was as a person. She wasn't just fighting crime on the streets. She was fighting for equality, for justice, and for the people she loved most. And in that moment, Elijah understood that his mother's influence wasn't just something that protected him, it was a force for good, a reminder that standing up for others, especially when they can't do it for themselves, was one of the most powerful things you could do in life. For the viewers, Elijah's story serves as a powerful reminder. No matter how tough the world may seem, standing up for yourself is crucial. And when you have someone by your side who loves and supports you, who empowers you to be strong and true to yourself, it can make all the difference. The courage to speak out, to fight for justice, and to support one another creates a ripple effect that can change the world, one act of bravery at a time.